Welcome to Still Plays Galaxy of Heroes. This is our talk series. Today I want to hit these topics. I want to give my perspective on everything that is making the player base upset right now. It's something that I've stayed out of for the most part, other than on my Discord. I want to give my perspective on Conquest now that we're wrapping it up. We're in the final hours of the event, which has given me enough time to figure out what I think about the recent changes, then my perspective on the nerfs, and then quickly hit upon the Galactic Chase thing, logins, other things that we usually bring on this channel. I want to eventually get to Lord Vader and Darth Maul. I'm going to do those in a separate video. There's a ton of stuff since the last time I've done one of these videos for me to opine on, but we're not going to get too bogged down in here. And as always, we will wrap up with the free-to-play gearing of my roster. It's going to be a bigger one because we haven't done it in a while. Basically, all of the gearing since August is going to be covered. As we talk about these topics, I'm going to be playing footage from my Conquest, going after those squad feats using Gear 11, Gear 12 characters, sometimes augmented with relics. But the broader point I want to be making is playing the way that I do, going after a broad set of characters and having a lot of lower gear characters because of going after that broad set of characters is not going to stop me from getting the red crate, and it shouldn't stop you from having a really high performance in Conquest and in other game modes. But now onto the issue at hand. I've been slow to give my perspective on this topic because I personally feel fairly insulated from a lot of it. In terms of Conquest, I wanted to play through it and see what I thought. And because I do feel players are justified in being upset, and I don't want to detract from that. In fact, I think players are more justified today than at any point in the past. Because we've seen things like this before, and we'll see things like this again. We've seen players threaten to quit over a large host of things, like when it comes to the introduction of relics, Galactic Legends, Crane Core. We've seen a number of things happen in the past that have resulted in players either quitting or threatening to quit. This situation, however, I think, especially with the nerfs, directly impacts whales and krakens in a way that I think is harmful to the game. Now, if you're a free-to-play player, I don't think the nerfs are a big deal. Your best counter to Galactic Legends as a free-to-play player is roster construction. By building out a deeper roster than your opponents, and by limiting your roster bloat, you are going to be able to beat players who are not careful with their rosters basically all the time. It's not an issue. So the nerfs, I don't feel are impacting me. Also, I never liked investing in non-GL counters because those teams always inherently have a limited shelf life. They're a high-risk investment for a free-to-play player because of that. Because when you're free-to-play, you don't want to risk the investments that you make no longer being relevant. And that can happen in all sorts of ways. It can happen with either another team being released that is a better counter, which we saw with Jedi Knight Luke and Jedi Master Luke being added to the game. And it could happen with another character being introduced which buffs the GL team, which technically, like Commander Ahsoka does with Jedi Master Kenobi, and we'll be seeing with Maul with Lord Vader. And any non-GL counters would be negated by that. And in the past, like when it came to like the Bastila Shan counters that used to exist against Rey and SLKR, I never invested in those teams. I had a Gear 11 video where I talked about, a year ago I had this video where I talked about my surprise Gear 11s, Bastila Shan being on that list, and a number of people brought up how she's worth investing in because she's a GL counter, but I still have her at Gear 11, and I'm happy that I have her at Gear 11 because she's no longer, for the most part, needed in that kind of way, and that, to me, she's not a good enough character for it. But if you are a whale or a kraken, you cannot do what free-to-play players do, which is use roster construction to avoid GLs. Because whales and krakens, one, they have their full GL teams going up against full GL teams, and also at that level, there's such a small pool of players who are spending at that level that they're all playing each other multiple times. They have rematches at a very frequent rate. And what the Nerfs have done, what these non-GL counter Nerfs have done, is destroy the strategic nature of playing Grand Arena at that level. Where, like, what's fun about games like this is using strategy to beat your opponent. When you have, like, these stale counters, like if you're using a GL team against a GL team, like that gets stale, that gets boring. These non-GL counters were fun. And what CG is doing is limiting fun in the game. And that is a very high-risk move. On Cubs' channel, he has a Whale Talk series that I find very illuminating. In previous installments, during previous moments of outrage within the community, Galactic Legends, Relics, and I recognize a small sample size, but the players that Cubs speaks to were not upset or as upset about the changes to the game, because what they got in return for Relics and Galactic Legends was an advantage. They were able to buy into the creation of a mode that separated themselves from free-to-play players and light spenders and bought themselves a period of time where they had that large advantage. But now what we're seeing in that Whale Talk series is those same players who used to be very patient and understanding with previous changes within the game. Now they are upset and joining the chorus of other upset players because, again, this is negating the fun that they are having within the game, and it is nullifying the investments that they have previously made into those GLs. Now, I think that's everything I want to address with the Nerfs. I think now we need to address Conquest. And now with the problems with Conquest, and this is a problem for everybody, us pros and whales and krakens alike. Because whales and krakens can't buy their way out of the bad mechanics that now exist within this game mode. Unlike a lot of other people, I was happy with the addition of this game mode. I wasn't in love with it. I could tell that it was going to get stale quickly, and that my interest in it would be limited because it's the same thing as everything else. It's the same thing as Galactic Challenges. It's the same thing as doing any node. It's slightly improved. When it came to Galactic Challenges, I talked about I think I even made a list video about ways to improve Galactic Challenges. And like, I hate feats because feats they're not creative, they're not interesting, they're just a grind mechanic. And that has now been turned up to 11, this grind mechanic. And part of that is probably that they are making the addition of good characters in this game, making them obtainable through Conquest, which might be a mistake if this is how it's going to take one of the game modes that players did universally like to now being extremely upset about. Because, like, with Conquest before, I was able to do almost 0 refreshes and get the final crate. I think in the last 2 or 3 days, I would start doing refreshes as I felt like some of those counting feats were out of reach. But in most cases, I was able to build out an optimum strategy. This time around, like, I can show you, like, I've been spending crystals like crazy, partly because I didn't spend enough early on, but I think if this is how Conquest is going to be moving forward, you probably have to do all the 50 crystal refreshes from the start and as you get closer to the finish line, then consider if you need to do more. Like, I've spent a lot of crystals playing this game mode this time, and I think I could do better in other plays. One of the things that you see a lot of the player base complaining about, and I think is actually overstated and a non-issue, is this middle boss node. Like, yes, I agree, it is lame to beat it in these ways. That you have to beat it 3 times. But when you take in the reality of how many feats that you have to do, how many attempts it takes to accomplish all of these feats, you're going to get your 3 attempts on those boss nodes. They're hardly the problem. The bigger problem are the feats, the other counting feats themselves. Like, these are awful. They're a huge time suck. And the reality is, and I can see it from my YouTube stats, the majority of people who play this game are like 25 to 45. We are not people who have a ton of time. And if you take players like whales and krakens, they usually have a job that can supplement their spending. Like, a lot of players have families. Like, this is not good for anybody. Like, it's one of the things I really hated about Marvel Strike Force was that blitz mode, because it was just a time suck. Grind mechanics are lazy game design. I hate them. I think it would be good to bring this game to a more casual status, to just take out the characters, find another way for us to obtain them if that's what it takes. But they could also do something like, instead of having the routes be randomized, remove that. I mean, you could have it to a certain extent, like these data discs, you could have a route that gets you good data discs, or you have a route that gets you lesser data discs, and the route that gets you the good data discs has harder teams, and you want those data discs in order to beat squads in later sectors. Like, I would not mind if I was prevented from getting the final crate, if that meant, like, I just needed a bunch of relicates and sector 5 was unbeatable for me. I can understand that. Like, I can accept that. I think a lot of players would be upset about it. I would be fine if that is how CG wanted to stop me and stop players like me from getting certain characters. Like, I can accept that they want Maul to be for a certain segment of the player base, and probably a segment of the player base who spends money. But the fact that the only way to get Maul is through a horrible game design mechanic, that is not good for anybody, and it's just going to kill interest in the game. And I would rather they just make Sector 5 impossible than do what they're doing. I'm going to throw in a quick 2 cents on this Galactic Chase announcement. I think for most veteran players like me, or players at least who obsessively go after farms, this isn't something that is too interesting. But I do think it's probably a thing that is good for newer players. I think it probably would be more beneficial if it continues to be ship heavy, considering those are the slow farms or now the accelerated farms. You've seen in the new account how, like, farms are way more tolerable now because of the accelerated farms. But these ship farms, you just feel them so much more now because of that difference. I do think, though, that if it is going to be character shards, I think it might be nice that, like, maybe at 11 months after a character gets released, before they're added to a node, or maybe a couple months before then, some of those single drop characters get a brief Galactic Chase. They could make it like a day or 2. So it's because at that point, whales, krakens, obsessive players like me, they've already got the character farmed up. Like, I'm basically done with the Bad Batch. It's the status of my Bad Batch farms. I'm almost done with Tech and Echo, and then I'll only have Omega left. So, like, for a player like me, I am going to be done with any new character farm within a couple of months of them being added to a node. The Bad Batch has taken me a little bit longer just because of the number of them, and I haven't done anything more than the 50 crystal refreshes. But for a player who isn't like me, the whales and krakens would have already spent their money. So by at the 10-month period or 11-month period after a character's been released, you're just going to be doing something that is nice for players to give them an opportunity to work on some of those new character farms that aren't going to be relevant to your top 1% of players, your top 10% of players, whatever the number would be. But it would be something that would be a good gesture towards the player base, and I think would be a better use, an effective use of these Galactic Chase events. What I don't want to see are characters that are available in stores or are available on nodes that are relatively easily farmable already, using up a Galactic Chase slot. I like that Malevolence and Negotiator are next, but again, that's something that it's not really. I'm done with everything, so it's. This stuff isn't personally interesting to me. I'm trying to think about what types of things would be beneficial towards the new account and to newer players, and put myself into their shoes. Onto this stuff. So this is something I would not normally talk about on this channel, but these crystal gear packs that they release from time to time, I wanted to highlight them, even though it's over now. But what I find curious about them is when the timing of these types of things. One, it's near the end of the quarter, but it's also a moment of, is there a reason why CG is trying to make me spend crystals? Because with these crystal packs, with Conquest, with Piet and Lord Vader, there's these moments where the CG is trying to deplete my crystal stores, and I just wonder what's coming next. It's been a while since I've done a talk video, so I'm going to show a lot of free-to-play gearing that I did during the past couple rounds, but I'm going to do it with accelerated footage and narrate over it. So here's my gearing from August 10th. What I was primarily doing here was looking to start increasing some of my GP to give myself some more interesting matchups in Grand Arena. So I started working on the Piet requirements, and this is not something I would recommend doing. I usually say wait until the event occurs, then do your gearing. I started doing it early. So in this week here, I'm taking all these characters up to gear 12, and then in the next set, I'm going to bring them up to relics. So, because what I've done with the rest of my roster is I've taken up every character for the most part that is worth gearing up to a gear 11 minimum as my staging ground, and from there I'm able to pick and choose who I want to take higher. And again, I did that in order because it's a much faster way to do it, and I'm free to play and I'm done with all this stuff. And I wouldn't be at this point if I was getting a lot of gear 12 or focusing more on relics. I think Dengar's the last one, so we're going to move to the next clip. And now we're here on August 24th, 2 weeks later, doing the rest of the gearing for not the rest, we still have a little bit more to do, but we took the bulk of the characters to relics during this set. It actually takes a while. Let me make sure we're doing this fast. Let me skip ahead here, talking too much. So now what we're looking at is taking all these characters up to relics. The Bosk relic is one that I've spoken ill of for a long time, that it didn't give enough, but now he's required. It's actually kind of one of the things that I don't like about all the changes within the game is just how many things are required for something now. It really limits your ability to build a roster, especially when everything's required at a certain relic level. You're so much more limited in your own roster creativity. And I think it's one of the sad changes to the game. Like up through Gear 12, there's a ton of variety in how you could build a roster. And I understand CG has a monetary incentive, but it makes the game less interesting. Because like now, especially when it comes to the Executor, everybody's going to have fleets that are close to maxed out. And is there, even at least with Malevolence and Negotiator, there's a variety of Malevolence and Negotiator fleets, and you can have them at various relic levels, especially if you go with counters, because like that's the way that I play. And if you're constantly countering the Malevolence with the Negotiator and vice versa, you're able to use lower gear and not have to push up as much as you would with a mirror. So I take all these characters up. I don't think I did it in this video, but I took TIE Fighter Pilot up as well. I think probably the next weekend, but he was the only character I did, I think. But then I'm taking the rest of these requirements. So Orsing gets brought up to 11, we move on. I think I take Ki-Adi-Mundi and Tusken. I think I'd bring up at a minimum. So I saved as much gear as I could, but we just burned through a ton of my gear stores with all those relics, and then with the rest of these, the relicking that we do here. Or the gearing that we do here. So Ki-Adi-Mundi, I just wanted to bring him to 11. I still only have him at 4 stars. I'm hoping that I get him to 5 stars after this next TV payout. And then Tusken, we do the same thing. Tusken sucks. He needs a ton of Carbantes. Like, he's not a friendly character to gear. But I just wanted him done. But the rest of the Lord Vader requirements, it's really the relic levels where I don't even think Lord Vader is going to be my third GL. I think he's going to be like my fourth. Because I'm going to do JMK next because his relic levels are far more favorable. Like, I don't want to relegate ARC Trooper. That's just nonsense. And then I'm probably going to do Sith Eternal Emperor after that. Then maybe Lord Vader. Maybe I'll feel about it differently once I relic up the Bad Batch. At that point, it might be a different calculation. It might be close enough where I'll feel differently, but right now, I'm not so sure. No, what else did I do this week? Oh, Commander Tano. I work on Commander Tano because she's useless at Gear 11. Like, I just wanted to test her to see how I felt about her at Gear 11. Oh, and then Quill and IG-11 I take up to Gear 12 as well because I was testing the counter against crew, where going up against a Relic 7 crew, I could see it working. I mean, it would obviously work at Relics, but I wanted to see if it would work at Gear 12, and I didn't get a chance in this final couple weeks of 3v3 Grand Arena. I started getting Ray matches and C matches instead of SLKR matches. But I wanted to see if at Gear 12 I could handle a Relic'd out crew team. And then Commander Ahsoka, bringing her to Gear 12 and I've been testing her at Gear 12. I've actually been able to beat the special mission in the first phase of GOTBs with a Gear 12 Commander Ahsoka. So she's actually, I think I did that Gear 11 too. I did do that Gear 11. It was terrifying though. It's much safer at Gear 12. And that's what I did that week. And now for the outro. I knew this was going to be a long one, so I was going to leave Darth Maul and Lord Vader, Executor, all that for a future video. We'll be back soon. Don't know where I am with work, real work right now. It's been busy, so I've been slow this past few months on putting out a lot of videos and talk videos. But I want to get to a point where we can be more consistent, which is something I've long been promising. But thank you for everyone who supports through the inconsistent output of this channel. I really appreciate it. Be safe out there, everyone, and be excellent to each other. This is Still Plays Galaxy of Heroes.